Is Awake Radio.
Awake Radio.
Awake Radio.
Awake Radio.
Awake Radio.
Awake Radio.
awakeradio.co.uk.
Thank you for listening to Organic News here on Awake Radio, where we try to give you news that is organic. Good evening. Welcome to this Earth Day edition of Organic News here on Awake Radio. That my plan was to do the show remotely from Earth Day events going on in Lower Manhattan, but it actually started raining, and so that's what we're starting like a few minutes late. I just ended up staying on the train and came home. But we're going to have Andy from Freedom Talk Radio Network. He's in the UK, and he's going to be talking about forced adoption that's going on in the UK that I saw posted. Someone from 1 Billion Rising had posted it. Like his number was posted on the advertisement, and I, called the number, and he answered. I spoke with him for a few moments. He kind of filled me in on what was going on. And so I asked him if he wouldn't mind, if he had time, he could just talk about what's going on. Paula is actually trying to get him as we speak.
A very good evening and welcome to the end game here on Awake Radio and Shaziz.
Tired, but happy. Grenada's watch up. This week has been rather exciting, folks.
Hello everybody, old Shaziz here out here at the Mad Science Laboratory. Hope everybody's doing well.
This is your host, James Swagger, and for the next hour, we'll be getting into some fascinating topics.
Hello, I'm Paula, and this is Grassroots Music. And
welcome to this week's Health Show. I hope each and every one of you have had a very blessed week. Thank you.
Okay, welcome, folks.
Okay, we're back. Yes, we're going to have a different schedule. Andy, there was a bit of a mishap, and we're unable to get him. So plan B is I'm going to play a really good talk I went to last night on whistleblowing with Debra of World Can't Wait, Carl Dix. He works a lot with Professor Cornel West, and Faiza Ali, this Arabic woman who works here in Brooklyn for Association on Whistleblowing in the NYPD. So with that, it was held, it was also with an organization, Brooklyn for Peace. So you can find the Facebook event page for it if you look up whistleblowing and surveillance. You can find it there. So here we go.
Okay, so thank you everybody for coming tonight. This is our panel event on whistleblowers and surveillance. My name is Joel, part of Brooklyn for Peace Arts and Culture Committee. We helped organize this event with World Can't Wait, which Debra Sweet is a part of. Really briefly, our panelists are Debra Sweet from World Can't Wait. We have Carl Dix from the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, and Faiza from the Arab American Association of New York. And I was going to let everybody introduce themselves. And just a quick reminder, if everybody can turn their cell phones to vibrate or turn them off. And we're going to let the panelists introduce themselves.
Thanks, Joel, and thanks for putting this event together. Your committee did the great bulk of the work, and it's really good to be in Brooklyn. Speaking for myself, I do a lot of events in Manhattan, and it's really good to be here. So thank you. World Can't Wait, as maybe many of you know, was formed in 2005 to drive out the Bush regime, and we were not successful at doing that. The Bush regime was replaced in an election that widely bamboozled people into thinking things were going to be much better, but World Can't Wait after 2009 has continued, and the mission of World Can't Wait is stop the crimes of your government. And we start with war, torture, and surveillance is really something that we're very concerned with as of its implications for being able to stop the other crimes of the government. That being the point. I come from a very, let's say, decades of opposing U.S. imperialist wars. I became a revolutionary in the 60s, and I am still on that road. Very much revolution, nothing less. And yet, and at the same time, I'm really glad to be uniting with a lot of other people, including Christians, lots of social workers, lots of people in World Can't Wait who really want to make the system work, and we have a lot of vigorous debate over whether the system can ever actually work or what it is that we need. Maybe we can get into some of that tonight, but I'm glad to be here to talk about whistleblowers, surveillance, Snowden, and us. What are the implications? Thanks.
Okay, I'm Carl Dix, and basically longtime revolutionary leader and representative of the Revolutionary Communist Party. I've been a revolutionary for decades, let's just leave it at that. And my initiation into actively opposing this government was around the time I got my orders to Vietnam back in 1970. I was part of the largest mass refusal to go to Vietnam during that war, the Fort Lewis Six. Did 2 years at Leavenworth Military Penitentiary for taking that stand. And coming out of it, I had to dig at why do these wars happen? Does it have anything to do with what was happening to black people here in this country back in the 1960s? And it was that exploration and interrogation that led me to become a revolutionary and a communist, which I've been ever since. I am also the co-founder of the Stop Mass Incarceration Network. Cornell West and I joined in the summer of 2011. On my birthday, we did it actually. It was July 31st. We formed the Stop Mass Incarceration Network. And we did that because there is just tens of millions of people in this country whose lives are being ground up by the criminal justice system. You know, and we can talk more about that, but it's not, there are the people in prison, which is 2.2 million right now. There's 5 million people who used to be in prison, but who are still discriminated against because they used to be in prison. But on top of that, there are the loved ones of all of those people. Because when you put a person in prison, you have incarcerated the lives of a whole family that are enmeshed in that system. And this is not because of heightened criminal activity, but because people have been criminalized. It's immoral, unacceptable, and it must be stopped. And we formed the Stop Mass Incarceration Network to do just that. I'll talk more about that later, but I will let you know right now that network is part of an effort for a month of resistance to mass incarceration in October of this year, and we invite everybody to be a part of it. I wanted to be a part of this discussion because I felt that, one, what they're trying to do to Snowden is a part of criminalizing legitimate activity. I didn't say lawful because laws depend on who gets to write the laws. Criminalizing legitimate and necessary activity. Well, we'll get into this more, but let's remember that like millions of people around the world are now aware of and talking about the massive government spying, which many of them wouldn't have known about except for what Snowden did, you know, and that's a very important point for us to remember in this. So I wanted to speak on that, but I also wanted to bring it together with the whole way the state apparatus in this country functions to suppress people here and around the world. So let me stop there and pass on to
Good evening, everyone. My name is Faiza Ali. I'm the advocacy coordinator at the Arab American AAANY is a social service and advocacy group located in Bay Ridge, and we service a largely Arab immigrant, Arab American and Muslim community, not just in Bay Ridge, but really across New York City. The reason why I'm here tonight is actually to talk about surveillance in our backyard. You know, I was actually really interested to make the connections of surveillance on a more broader level that's existing in the federal government through NSA with, and drawing those parallels with what's happening here in New York City and the surveillance of Muslim communities, in particular by the New York Police Department. My background is not as extensive as my panelists. I almost feel like I'm out of my league a little bit, but I do, you know, I've worked with a number of community-based organizations, mostly in the Muslim community, on civil rights issues in particular. So I got my activist chops actually organizing on campus here in New York City at Pace University during the height of the anti-Iraq war movement. In fact, some of my first mass mobilizations was downtown in Lower Manhattan. When I was an undergrad. And then I started working with a community organization called the Council on American and Islamic Relations here in New York City that documented issues of discrimination facing Muslim Americans in New York in a post-9/11 context and documenting issues of hate crimes, and stayed with, you know, a variety of community-based organizations working on a number of issues. But in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, I've been really focusing in on the unwarranted surveillance of the Muslim community by the New York Police Department, as well as other forms of discriminatory policing practices that I'm hoping you can get into a little bit later this evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just so everybody knows, we have some prepared questions for our panelists till about 8 or 8:15, and we're going to have audience questions until 9 when the event ends. You've already touched on it. Let's just go down the road this way again. But this event came out of Arts and Culture Committee's own conversations amongst ourselves about Edward Snowden last year when, you know, I mean, it's in the news every day, but it started just on Snowden, and then other members of the committee really pushed the idea to how is this affecting other people other than people like Edward Snowden. So if you could talk about how different communities, different people are affected by surveillance and by Snowden's actions, whether it's directly or a kind of trickle down of the surveillance.
All right, well, I do want to acknowledge, and I see the Arts and Culture Committee has brought these posters of the other well-known whistleblowers, and I think it's really important to bring in Jesslyn Raddock and Thomas Drake and Chelsea Manning. Chelsea Manning is one of the most significant whistleblowers really in world history, because if you look at what happened after Bradley, he was Bradley Manning, and in the summer of 2010, just 4 years ago, released that video called Collateral Murder, which, by the way, is back on our table, the World Can't Wait table right up there. Raise your hand, Richie. We've given out thousands of copies of that video, Collateral Murder, to people around the world, because people have got to see what the U.S. has done in their name. And the shocking part of that for a lot of people was the cold-blooded murder of Iraqi civilians and then the laughing afterwards by the U.S. military. That is the piece. I went to the trial Chelsea Manning, and sat there a lot, and I heard her testify about this. That was the piece that set her on to this whistleblower, when she heard her colleagues and fellow soldiers doing this and then laughing about it. And they didn't care if there was ever justice. And she said to herself, I have to do something so this gets to the people of this country in particular, so it could stop. And this was motivated by the feeling and the sense that I think we in World Can't Wait and you really want to promote. American lives are not more important than other people's lives. These were Iraqis, children. These were photographers. They were shot down in a cold-blooded way. And for someone to knowingly risk their life and their whole future to expose this to the world is something I don't think we can ever really fully appreciate the gravity and importance of. But Chelsea is still fighting. Her case is being appealed, and it's really important that people keep following this and stay on that. Why? Because the truth really matters, even if it comes out after the fact. This is the role of whistleblowers in the society. When Carl went to prison for refusing to go to Vietnam, when people all over the world hear and see that people living in this country make sacrifices, even if they're less in some ways than other people are making, they begin to understand that there are people living in this country who say, no, we don't go along with what our government is doing. So I think just the appreciation for the whistleblowers and for people speaking the truth is an extremely important starting point. So I'll pass it along.
Okay, on this point of surveillance, I think we have to understand that there's been surveillance since before there was America. I mean, we could go back to the days of slavery. Massa always wanted to know what were the folks out in the fields planning, what were the people enslaved in the house planning. And the reason Massa wanted to know that is because if you were on top of that, you can control their activity and keep them from resisting the injustices you're doing to them. And that carries right up to today with this massive government spying, because this is a system that's carrying this out. The NSA is part of the government or state apparatus that is spying on people all around the world, because the U.S. global imperialist system has potential enemies all around the world. The people who are working in near slave conditions in sweatshops in Bangladesh or oil fields in Saudi Arabia. They're worried about what these people might do. So they want to be on top of that. They want to know about who they're talking to, what they're saying to people, who they're phoning, who they're emailing, all of that. They even want to know what other governments are doing, including some that are right now allied with them, because they know that just like them, these guys are cutthroat exploiters who would do to them what they, just that the U.S. is bigger and more powerful right now. So that's what this whole spying thing is about. And it is driven not by trying to keep people safe, but trying to keep a system in effect and to keep the exploitation and oppression that system brings down in effect. I'll speak more about different interconnections, but I wanted to open that up right now.
Yeah, you can share this one too. So I want to share a little bit about, like I said, the scope of the New York Police Department surveillance of Muslims here at home, here in New York City, and many actually up and down Atlantic Avenue, but also talk a little bit about the impact of it. So for over a decade, the New York Police Department's Intelligence Division has been conducting unwarranted, wholesale, widespread surveillance of Muslims and anything that appears to be Muslim. And we, the organizing in the activist community, understood that after 9/11 there were going to be significant changes to the way the local law enforcement actually interacts with the Muslim community. Right? We anticipated that the community was going to be scrutinized and treated as suspect. But it wasn't until August of 2011 when the Associated Press started releasing leaked documents coming from within the NYPD department that we got a sense of how in-depth the surveillance program in fact was. I'll never forget where I was the night before this happened. And I shared this story with you because, it's important just because of really like where the community was at in terms of our own engagement and level of engagement with local communities. The night before, I was with a number of community members and leaders at Gracie Mansion. We were at a fast breaking at an iftar with the mayor and a number of other city officials, many of them who are Muslim, celebrating the month of Ramadan. And we were also, it was also during the time where the mayor had come out and spoken against a lot of the anti-Muslim rhetoric around the Park 51 Center in Lower Manhattan. So it was one of those moments that we were actually in line with what the mayor at the time was saying, right? One of those rare moments. I was sitting at a table with a number of community leaders, but one representative who worked with the police commissioner. And before it was the sunset, before I could even break my fast, he leans in and he said, "It's people like you that make our work really difficult." And so, I'm thirsty. I've been fasting all day. And so I'm hot also because it was warm. It was in the summer. It was August. And I'm thinking to myself, do I want to engage this man now or not? And there were still 10 minutes left to the sunset. And I thought, you know what? Why not? So I asked him, what do you mean by this? And he said, well, here I am trying to go into the mosque with the police to engage the community. But you advocates and organizers are telling the community you're scaring them and telling them that we're sending in informants, that we're sending in Asian provocateurs, that we're listening to what they're saying when in fact that is not true. And of course, I said, well, I'm an organizer. I've heard stories of people who actually beg to differ. And we engaged in a little conversation, and I don't know, it was an intervention by God that it was time to open our fast, and I ate and I kind of just let it be. But it definitely set a tone for the rest of the evening and the conversation took place. The next morning, it was 6:30, maybe 6:45. I started getting alerts on my phone. I don't know about anyone else, but I sleep with it right next to me. So I started getting quite a number of phone calls and text messages, and I thought, what could possibly, happen? What could have happened, actually? And it was a colleague of mine who said, get up, you need to read the Associated Press article I just sent you. And I did. And it was really the first time that all the suspicions, really the worst fears I think that Muslim communities had in New York City, they were confirmed with just one leaked document. And that document talked about how the New York Police Department had developed something called the Demographics Unit. And they later changed the name, which is a tactic that government uses all the time to rename policies, right? They changed the name to the Demographics Unit. But essentially the Demographics Unit was this body within the intelligence division of the New York Police Department who identified 29 ancestries of interest. 28 of them came from Muslim majority countries. My family's from Pakistan, so we were on that list. I work in the Arab community, mostly Palestinian. Palestine was on the list. And then the 29th category was Black American Muslim. And the leaked document was really interesting. And I really encourage if folks are curious or interested, if you just Google or if you go to ap.org/NYPD, you'll see the first batch of documents that the AP started releasing. That again showed really a window into what we knew existed, but again, the extent of which this program existed, we did not know. I want to take just 2 more minutes, if that's okay, to talk a little bit about some of the other surveillance tools. And I stress this now because I understand that the conversation is a little bit more broader. But I'm a Brooklyn girl. I'm born and raised in this borough. I I'm also a student, forever a student of the civil rights movement, so I understand that communities throughout history in this country have been targeted. But it's something different for some reason, and I can't explain it when these issues become really personal. And I say personal because, there were a number of documents that that the AP kept on releasing. But the last set that they released was August of last year, in 2013, that basically said that the NYPD had something called terrorism enterprise investigations. They came up with this term. I think it's actually a term used by the FBI as well. But they basically labeled mosques, entire mosques, as terrorism enterprises, which gave them the opportunity to conduct surveillance on anyone who ever stepped foot in that mosque. So you could be a cab driver that's stopping to pray and leaving, but because you walked into a mosque, into a prayer space that's been deemed or labeled as terrorism enterprise, you're subjected to investigations. In that same document about terrorism enterprises, I learned that my organization, the Arab American Association of New York, was also a target. And it was a target for the NYPD to place a confidential informant on our board. And so we were learning about the surveillance program and how it basically impacted a lot of public places that Muslims prayed at or they gathered at. Arguably a mosque is a public space anyone can go in, you guys can walk in. But this was the first time that they were actually targeting, or we learned, it was confirmed, again, we always had that hunch, that they were actually going into private institutions, not just posing as a client seeking services from one of our caseworkers, because that has happened. But this time trying to infiltrate an organization, which is definitely a reminiscent of COINTELPRO Pro, which I'm sure that we'll get into. So I wanted to paint a picture of what's really happening right here in New York City, targeting one specific community, but of course it's, it goes without saying that it's today it may be us, tomorrow it's going to be more people who look like, who look like you and I on the screen.
Okay, so that was one part. We're going to go to part 2 right now.
Thank you. Bringing up COINTELPRO also brings up how different communities are surveilled and are affected by it. Faiza was just telling us how personally she felt when confronting these things. Can you talk about that, Debra and Carl, as well?
Well, I brought a book along. This has only been out for about a month. The Burglary. People familiar with it? This is how COINTELPRO got publicized. This was a number of pacifists in the Philadelphia area in 1971, right after Kent State, about about a year and a half after, via COINTELPRO, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were killed in Chicago, the Black Panther leaders. This book tells the story of how these pacifists, mainly, and anti-war activists broke into the FBI headquarters in Media, Pennsylvania. We heard about this later. This was in the spring of 1971. Nobody ever knew who did it. It was not solved by the FBI, ever. And it's now come out because the statute of limitations ran out that they did this really interesting book. I'd really encourage people to read it for a whole host of reasons. But it does broaden out our understanding. To me, when I hear COINTELPRO, having lived through the time and actually walking through the apartment where Fred Hampton was killed in December of 1969 and seeing the bloodstains, when I hear the word COINTELPRO, that's the only thing I can really think of. But it turns out that, in fact, it was a longer running program. And if we're talking about communities that have been targeted, we need to talk about political activists, people who have been targeted way back, through people slaves playing the drums, but all through the history of this country. There has been a state apparatus that has gone after political activists, and COINTELPRO was officially ended in mid-1975 with a lot of protest. People in this room, I'm sure, were involved in that. But we have no basis to assume that programs like that are not in place now. Absolutely no basis to assume that. In fact, what came out in 2005 with the first NSA revelations, people remember when Bush had just been re-selected in 2004, the scandal developed over the fact that the NSA was spying on individual people in the U.S. And the New York Times, goddamn them, sat on that for a year. They knew about it. It took them a year to reveal that. And that administration actually sailed through. There were people like Barack Obama and some other Democrats that fussed about this NSA surveillance, and they said, well, that's never going to happen when we're in power. Well, guess what? The biggest news story after Edward Snowden's revelations, which, and I believe Glenn Greenwald is telling the truth when he says, essentially, the biggest stuff has not come out yet. He said last week, we still have a lot to reveal, and in fact, we're working on it very systematically, and most of it hasn't been revealed, the stuff that's really going to shock you. But the biggest shocker for a lot of people, or the one that people should really be taking seriously, is that Barack Obama came out and said, first of all, lied consistently over the last year, lied about what the U.S. has been doing, his administration in particular, and then has said, well, we're going to make reforms. We're going to clean this up. Need I say, don't believe the hype. That is not what is happening. What we're learning is that at every single level, this government is literally vacuuming up all the information about us. And we read today that it's been revealed, whether you have a Gmail email address or not, Google has all your information, because if you ever correspond with somebody with a Gmail address, they vacuum it all up. So why? Why are they doing this? People have argued to me that it's because there's a company that's making a lot of money about this. Well, maybe that's true, but I think the thing that we really have to confront is that this is about control. It's control of us. It is limiting what we think, what we know, but it is also holding over our heads political activists, people in different communities, people of color who are always targeted by this system. It is holding over our heads. If you even think about rising up in any way and doing anything about this, you're in great danger, because we know where you live, literally. We know what you're thinking, and we will come down on you. And this is a big problem for our movement, frankly. I know people who won't come to discussions like this. And they tell me that because we are afraid of being targeted, and I completely understand it when we find out what the NYPD has been doing, as if they are the CIA, the FBI, all rolled into one. So it's important just to come to grips with what they're actually doing, and then we have to figure out how do we build our organization and think about this in a way that really strengthens us to withstand this kind of really brutal, vast, unjust, illegitimate surveillance.
Okay, it's very important to connect surveillance to repression and suppression. I'm glad Debra brought up the murder by the Chicago police of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, because because they not only murdered them in their beds, but they had a confidential informant who was in the house before the murder was carried out, so that they knew where Fred Hampton was sleeping. This informant also drugged Fred Hampton. All this is documented. So they weren't just trying to find out what are they doing in their house. They were trying to set them up to go in and murder them and carry out a murder. And this is the role that surveillance plays. First, you identify potential threats and you surveil them to the greatest degree possible. You find out who's connected to who. And if those threats go from potential to actual, then you figure out how to smash them. That is their approach to this, and that's what we're dealing with. And we're dealing with a state apparatus that is out to keep this setup in effect, both in this country and around the world. And we have to connect this surveillance to the NYPD carrying out stop and frisk. They don't just check out and see who's doing what. Frankly, they were putting informants in those mosques and other places in order to attract people who might be angry about what the U.S. is doing. And there were cases where people got sent to jail where the basis for that case was that they responded to an agent of the government. And in this case, the government agency was the NYPD, who was floating, let's do something, and trying to collect people who might want to do that and then set them up to go to jail or worse. And I remember all of this stuff from the 1960s. And look, when the Church Committee, which was named after some senator whose last name was Church, had to do the hearings on COINTELPRO because of the exposure and the opposition, they disbanded the COINTELPRO, counterintelligence program, or COINTELPRO, to...
Oops. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Sorry, folks. I hit the wrong button. Okay.
COINTELPRO, counterintelligence program, or COINTELPRO, to much fanfare, and continued to carry out the same activity under other names. And we also have to be very sensitive to that, because disbanding the unit that carried out the surveillance of Muslims and people suspected maybe to be Muslim and whatever here in New York, disbanding that unit doesn't mean that this is stopped. And I'll get into this some more, but we also cannot take an approach, two things we cannot take an approach on. One, we can't take an approach that because they do so much surveillance, we can't do anything. That would be the wrong way to go on it. The other way we could go wrong is to say, well, the problem is that this surveillance is a deviation from the democratic norms that we have to get back to. Because they were doing this the whole time, all the way down. That's why I took us back to slavery. And I could have walked this up in detail, but I didn't think we had the time for that. So it's not a question of getting back to when they didn't used to do this, because the only difference is they have great technology now. I mean, Massa on the plantation didn't have the capability they had. They have that capability now, and we have to figure out how to resist it. And for me, we have to figure out how to get rid of the system that is responsible for it, the revolution, and I'll talk about that one later.
I thought I answered the question earlier, but I wanted to respond to two things that both Debra and Carl said. One, on the impacts. It's really important. I wanted to share, I don't have copies of this, but if you Google mapping Muslims, it's a report that community organizations put together, surveying and talking to people who were impacted by the Muslim surveillance program. And the demographics is just really one aspect of it, but in it are personal accounts from young people, from activists, from imams, everyone who talks about how this issue has touched them. There's one part, it's on page 25. I should have stapled this, right? Which is a sign that was put up in one of the Muslim student associations. And it says, please refrain from political conversations in the MSA. Read this to see why. And it was a poster put up in the Muslim Student Association room. It was a prayer space. And what it was pointing to was actually a story about the surveillance program. And this was just really one example of many instances where the community felt scared. They wouldn't just only come and sit in the back of a conversation like this or avoid coming here. They wouldn't participate in any of the rallies that we were organizing outside of London. They wouldn't sign a postcard requesting an investigation to the surveillance program. There were many layers of impact. One of them that I want to share was about the role of informants. Informants in the mosque not only cause mistrust between communities and the police, they cause mistrust amongst community. I had a community leader that came to my organization in Bay Ridge. We're a block away from the mosque. That was in all of the documents, the Islamic Society of Bay Ridge. And the community leader said to me, can you guarantee that the person that's praying next to me is not an informant? I was like, you want me to guarantee that to you? I can't do that. He's like, how am I supposed to feel comfortable to pray? I can't even concentrate. I can't even trust the people that are around me. I don't even know if the people I've been friends with, if one of them turns out to be an. And so the psychological trauma that this is having on a community is something that I wanted to just to bring up. Again, it's not just sowing mistrust between communities and the police. That's a separate conversation. It's sowing mistrust between community members. And really, that is what's holding back any sort of movement building that we want to be a part of to challenge and really end discriminatory policing practices. And the other point I wanted to make was about Carl, about making the connection between surveillance and stop and frisk. That's actually been one of the highlights of the work that we've been doing because, the Muslim community and the movement to end stop and frisk has actually been working together, drawing those parallels. For us, whether it's stop and frisk or unwarranted surveillance of Muslim community, these are two discriminatory policies cut from the same cloth. And so we've been talking to other groups and organizations like Community United for Police Reform on how do we actually work together to end discriminatory policing. So I wanted to share that as well.
And Carl, you brought up when people learn the scope of surveillance, they feel like nothing can be done about it. So maybe we can talk about that, how you in your organizations and as individuals think that we can fight back. Maybe we can start with Carl this time.
Okay. Just want to get right into it. Two things on two levels. One is, this is outrageous, it is immoral, and it must be stopped, but the government is not going to stop it. We should be clear on that. One point of bipartisan unity, we should note this, is very things Democrats and Republicans in Washington, D.C. can get together on. One thing they have almost all been able to get together on is to trash Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, to say these people need to be thrown in jail, they're guilty of treason. They also have been able to get together on not prosecuting or even exposing the criminals that Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden have exposed. Because they aren't just exposing government secrets, they're exposing war crimes and crimes against humanity. Those criminals are walking free, and the people who brought them to life are in jail. We have to meet this with determined mass resistance. We have to take the truth that Chelsea, Edward, and others have presented us and bring that to people and say, this is illegitimate. This cannot be allowed to go on. And everybody who thinks that this is unfair should be a part of that resistance. But then the other thing I'm going to tell you is that the reason we have an illegitimate, massive government spying program is because we are living under an illegitimate capitalist imperialist system, one that exists based upon vicious exploitation of people here in this country and around the world, and brutal suppression of people. That's why I keep connecting surveillance to suppression, because they don't just find out who the potential threats are, they move to crush them, and crush them in illegitimate ways. The Fourth Amendment that is being shredded through this government spying program was frankly already torn up in the ghettos and barrios in this country. Back in 1968, the U.S. Supreme Court okayed an approach of police searching people on hunches, just because, whatever. That Supreme Court ruling was later cited to justify the war on drugs and its approach to targeting inner city communities. It was cited in justifying the stop and frisk policy of the NYPD. And it basically said, oh, these cops, they're professionals. We have to trust them. So if they feel they need to search people, if they feel they need to stop people for any damn reason or no reason at all, other than the color of their skin, well, they know what they're doing. And see, on one level, they did know what they were doing. They were targeting blacks, Latinos. Post-2001, they were targeting Arabs, Muslims, and South Asians, anybody who looked like they might be Muslim. That's what they were doing. And they were doing it because all of those groupings of people were deemed to be potential threats that needed to be controlled. And we got to get rid of this system. It's going to take revolution to do that. Now, when I say revolution, I don't mean running out here right now and doing some crazy stuff, because it's not yet time to launch an all-out revolutionary assault. The system is not deep enough in trouble. There's not a revolutionary people numbering in the millions that are ready to put it on the line and make that happen. But what it is time to do is to mobilize people to fight the system's attacks and to bring out to them that these issues that they're fighting around are rooted in the nature of this system, and to work to prepare and get ready for a situation when the system is deep enough in crisis and when there is a revolutionary people numbering in the millions. That's something that we are working to do. And that also ties in with what I'm doing in relation to the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, because literally tens of millions of people's lives are caught up in the criminal injustice system of this country. I come at this as a revolutionary, but however you come at this, you have to ask yourself, is it okay with you that that's happening? And if you've got an ounce of justice in your heart, it should not be. And therefore, you should stand up and be a part of resisting this. And that's why Cornel West and I issued a call for a month of resistance to this in October. We're going to be doing nationwide demonstrations, panels, symposiums, and teach-ins on college campuses and in communities. We're going to do a major concert, as well as other cultural expressions. We're going to be mobilizing for sermons in mosques, churches, synagogues, and many other forms of resistance, all targeting mass incarceration. Because we need to change the way that millions of people in this country look at this problem. That's how we're going at it. We need them to see the illegitimacy of what's going on around this. The call for this month of resistance, actually my man Steve has them over there. Everybody should make sure they get one of those. People should endorse that call. They should also, why don't you make sure everybody gets one right now?
Okay, that was a good 45, almost in 50 or so minutes of the event last night. Whistleblowers and surveillance. You can see and listen to all of the recording from that event, which was a really good event. It's on my YouTube channel, like this month, and then Watters, Watters, although I haven't had a chance to edit them and, fill in the descriptions and the titles. They still have the letters and the numbers because I just uploaded them last night. So anyway, we're just going to take a quick break, and then we will be back with Mr. Bill Still, who was trying to get on last week for our really good talk about the Fed, but he wasn't available last week. So please stay tuned. Thank you.
You're listening to awakeradio.co.uk, awakeradio.us, and shazizradio.com. Awake Radio. Straight talk for the awake and the aware.
Okay, we are back. Again, you can listen to the rest of that really good talk that I recorded last night on, it's called Whistleblowers and Surveillance. It's on my YouTube channel at April, like this month, and my last name Waters, Watters. And we do have with us Mr. Bill Still, who couldn't unfortunately be with us last Tuesday when we had an action down by the Fed. We had a pretty good discussion. The weather was really bad, and we ended up with maybe 2 handfuls of people in the Jim Brady bar that's right near there, and I basically just did the radio show from there, talking about, to nationalize the Fed.
Neither one's a good option.
Yeah, we were talking about the Need Act that that Dennis Kucinich had created after. Do you want to tell what happened when you tried to get into?
Kucinich's Need Act was written by Steven Zarlenga, who runs something called the American Monetary Institute. And back when I was filming The Secret of Oz, he was having one of his AMI conferences in Chicago. And I called him up and said, look, I'm going to come up and film Ellen Brown and a couple other people. And I'd like you to be in The Secret. And he thought about it for a minute. Then he goes, no. And I said, well, how come? And then he went into this rambling thing where it basically explained that he started to explain that he got his first idea about monetary reform from my old video, The Money Masters. Then he kind of bit his tongue like he was sorry he said that. And that's when he said no, he didn't want to be in The Secret of Oz. So anyway, I went up there and went in the conference and sat down and talked to Ellen Brown for a little while, and then she went away and I guess talked to Zarlenga, and Zarlenga told her to tell me that I had to leave the conference, that I was not allowed to be in this conference. And she came back to tell me, and I said, well, I'm happy to pay. I mean, I didn't expect to get in for free, but I came in late and there was nobody at the door taking money. And so she went back and he said, nope, he's got to leave. So I'm the only person in history to be kicked out of a monetary reform conference just because of Zarlenga. He has a reputation as a hothead, and I understand his book's very good, but I mean, I'm not going to read it. So anyway, Zarlenga wrote Kucinich's Need Act.
Right.
And Kucinich's wife was really the driving force behind Kucinich's interest in monetary reform. She had shown up at the Bromsgrove Conference in England, which was the big annual confab of the select 55 monetary reformers worldwide that were invited. It was a very small room, so it was on an invitation basis. And I've been invited kind of like an open invitation for years, and I just never had the money to go. And I was going to go one year, and that Kucinich's wife was going to be there also. But then something happened, and I didn't have the money again, and so I didn't go. And then I went the next year, and that turned out to be the last year, which was, I guess, 2 years ago that it was held. But in any case, Kucinich's wife had a big interest in monetary reform, and apparently Zarlingo wrote the Kucinich bill. So when I got the bill, I was fine to, read Zarlingo's work. That's fine with me, as long as something gets done. I started reading it. It's rather long, and I read the first 20, 25 pages, and I was going, oh, wow, great, he hit the nail on the head, this is great. And then it got down to the point where it talked about the, what did they call it, the monetary board, which is basically the governing body that would decide what the quantity of money would be in the country.
Yeah.
And it was laid out exactly like the Federal Reserve Board. 9 members, I think it was 7-year terms, all terms, appointed by the president so that the president couldn't appoint a majority even if he served 2 terms in office. I mean, it was just identical. And I threw the thing down. I was so disgusted. So, I mean, he did everything right except the most important thing. He who controls the quantity actually would be the same type of layout and easily controlled from the center. And really, no, that's not what you want. What you want for the decision makers for how much money there is, because it's not what backs the money that's important. It's who controls the quantity. And so you want that who to be the broadest based, most democratically group of people that you can practically put together. I mean, at least one representative from every state in the union, if not 2 or 10 or 1 from every congressional district. I mean, you want a lot of people in there so to minimize the ability of the bad guys to buy it all off.
Does there have to be a who that controls the money supply, or can there just be, goods and services? Or, I mean, does it have?
So you're talking about backing the money supply with something, and you don't want anything to back the money supply. It's not what backs the money; it's who controls the quantity of money that's important. If you have anything backing money, then that anything can be traded electronically, and the rich guys of the world would just do the exact same thing they've always done, buy up the quantity of that anything that backs the money, and they'll be right back in the driver's seat again.
But then, who controls it also creates a problem.
Well, yeah, but at least you don't have the 5 richest guys on the planet controlling. At least you try to make as many people on this board as possible.
So, okay, exactly. I mean, and make it closer to controlling it. I mean,
exactly. You want the group of people most representative of we the people of the United States that you can imagine. And the same for every country. It's not just in this country. You want to have the broadest based control, the least centralized control of the determining the quantity of money in a country, because it's who controls the quantity that is who is the boss, who is in control. And if rich guys are controlling it, hey, guess what? They're going to do it in their interest and not the public interest. And that's the situation we have today.
Right, and that is not working out very well at all, and people don't seem to be making much of an uproar about it, and I can't...
No, I mean, all they're doing is talking about auditing the Fed. I mean, what do you think's going to happen? You think you're going to get Janet Yellen up there and say, oh, yeah, well, you've caught us, we've been lying, cheating, and stealing, change our ways. No, I mean, it might be interesting to know how they've been lying, cheating, and stealing, but that's not going to fix the problem. There's this huge push for audit the Fed. Audit the Fed will do exactly nothing.
Right, and who's going to audit them?
Well, it doesn't matter. That's not the solution is very simple. You have to change who controls the quantity of money, not what the Fed did in the past or who were the bad guys in the past. Forget about all that. Forget about chasing bad guys from the past. Let's fix it. It's so easy to fix and get out of this problem in a single year.
Yeah. So what do you think about Yellen? I mean, do you think she's going to do anything different?
No, it's more of the same. I mean, right now the folks who are in control of the quantity of money are the stockholders in the Fed, and the stockholders in the Fed are the commercial bank of this country. by definition. So therefore, since the Fed is a private corporation, it has to be responsive to its stockholders. It cannot possibly be responsive to we the people of the United States.
Exactly.
And so Yellen was appointed by these stockholders, and she was appointed for a reason, because she's not going to do anything against them.
Right. And so then to get the money in the hands, the people control the quantity of the money. I'm like, what is the first thing that we should be doing?
Well, I contend that as long as the government even has the capability of borrowing money, of having a national debt, you're never going to resolve this problem, because as long as the government is borrowing money, they're borrowing it from a someone, and the majority. Your grandmother buys savings bonds. That's part of lending the government money. Your pension funds buy treasuries. That's part of lending the government money. But the vast majority, or at least the majority of lending that goes on to the federal government, is done by banks and financial institutions, foreign and domestic. And so as long as you've got banks essentially lending most of the money to a country, then for sure the banks are going to be in control. The borrower is always servant to the lender. And that's why you've got this spectacle where we the people we feel like we no longer have any say in government. In fact, there was just a study that came out this week in Princeton showing that how the United States is closer to a plutocracy or an oligarchy than any of us realize at this point. They did a study on how much effective control we the people, or interest groups representing we the people, how much influence we really have over Congress, and it's almost nothing. So that's a problem.
And again, I don't understand why there isn't like so much more of an uproar about it. What are people going to do? Like wait until it's like a complete, oligarchy, a complete, like enslavement?
Yes, that's exactly right. Until there's sufficient pain, nothing is going to happen, because they know that their biggest weapon is to keep people confused. And so you've got people running around. What is the biggest anti-Fed movement in this country today? It's audit the Fed. It's even in the Fed. If you ended the Fed without ending what's behind the Fed, nothing happens. If you audit the Fed, absolutely nothing happens, other than you spend a lot of interesting statistics, but you don't cut at the core of the problem. The core of the problem is, number one, government borrowing. It should be absolutely illegal for the U.S. government to borrow money ever again, or any country on the face of this earth.
Right, and most people don't even understand that we don't have to borrow. Like, why are we borrowing?
Right. Why would you borrow when you can create? It's stupid.
But then when they want money too, they want to get money from the people, like they take the money for the people. Like when things go wrong, they want to sell the people off, as their debt. Like this whole idea of buying up debt, which I can't, like even fathom, like, buying debt and purchasing debt. I know that's not necessarily, involving the Fed. The Fed doesn't do anything about buying debt, but that's what banks do, right? They buy up debt.
Right. Well, it's a problem, and the reason it is a problem is because there are so many conflicting theories about what the solution is. But I've been on this monetary reform quest for about 30 years now. And I've seen tremendous strides, and gradually, even now, the gold bugs are starting to give up. Although, we heard you talking right at the top of the show. Excuse me for saying, but maybe you could back money by a basket of commodities, and you don't need to back it with anything other than the good faith and credit of the United States. People are really confused about all this stuff, and there's so many conflicting theories, and so that's their biggest ace in the hole.
And that's what they want. They want to keep the people confused, but if there's one thing, a simple thing that I just feel like is not confusing, is, that about the Fed, it is a private bank. It's not a government bank. That money is created from debt, and that money is basically a note of debt.
Right, exactly. And we just don't need it that way. I mean, history has shown, and that's been the core of all my work, is to show how throughout history, once you go to this system where you no longer have the government borrowing because the government can create their own money, then it works every single time it's tried. And yet when you talk to a gold bug, they'll tell you just the reverse. They'll say, oh, fiat money has always destroyed itself through hyperinflation every single time throughout world history. And whenever you hear that, ask them this simple question. Ask them, do you know how many hyperinflations there have ever been in recorded history? Because that is a knowable number. It's 44.
44.
Right. And they don't know that because they've been told that there are like hundreds of thousands of them, throughout history.
So you said hyperinflation, there have been 44?
Right. There's a specific economic definition of hyperinflation. And my friend at Johns Hopkins, whose name right now I am blocking on, but I'll get it for you in a second, is the world's leading authority on hyperinflation, and he writes a blog on it and has done primary research, and anyway, so it is a known number, and he tries to put some of those fires out, but it's like trying to put out a forest fire with a squirt gun. The gold bugs just keep on repeating the lie often enough, and so nobody gets to the truth.
All right. Okay, so your plan, like exactly, and the people that are listening, what your step-by-step plan would be to, take power away from those who are controlling quantity now.
Well, like I said before, number one is you have to eliminate the ability of the federal government to borrow.
Right.
That's absolutely essential. And of course, then if you can't borrow money, then you have to create money. And then if you have to create money, you have to control the quantity very carefully. And, if that's all we have to do to fix this problem, don't you think we can find a couple of honest people in this country who will, carefully monitor and adjust the quantity there's the proper amount of inflation, be that 0 or 1% or 2% or whatever the leading lights of the American economy think it should be. Yeah, I think you could get a lot of volunteers for that job.
Right. But, okay, so then my next question is, how do we get control away from, I'm sorry, I have to call them sociopaths. They're not going to give up this control so easily. For obvious reasons. They love the way things are going.
Oh, they love the way things are going. You mentioned the tax structure, the income tax structure before.
Yeah.
Well, there's also been studies done showing that the reason you never get anywhere with going to a fair tax and eliminating income tax is because giving income tax breaks to the wealthy is the biggest of income to members in Congress. That is the single biggest source of, call them bribes or call them influence peddling or whatever you want to call it. That's the biggest source of money for members of Congress is giving tax breaks and tax loopholes to wealthy individuals and wealthy corporations. So they're never going to eliminate that.
But isn't that a crime? Shouldn't that be a crime?
Yeah, it should be a crime.
This is what
How do you prove it, though? If somebody just says, okay, well, if you give me the tax break, me and my top 50 executives will all donate the maximum amount, $2,400, to your campaign. And then we'll set up a super PAC and donate an extra, $50 million to your campaign or whatever. There's no way you can prove it. The laws are specifically designed poll, even in the campaign election laws. So, that's another big problem.
I remember I was watching a news recently, and they showed this clip of Eric Holder, saying how difficult it would be to arrest and to jail any of the bankers from the the Wall Street crash of '08. And and it just really occurred to me, listening to him say that, it's too, so it's too difficult, right? They're too big to jail. And so this guy should not even have his position and have this job if it's too difficult, or if things are too difficult, then why does he have a job that he has?
Yeah, that's really good logic. I mean, an important thing to providing a stable democracy is the rule of law, and the rule of law has to be applied equally to all citizens. And that's always been, a basic tenet of the success of America. And as you can see, it's quickly eroding, especially in the last decade. And so that's just a problem. Once you don't have the American people are very slow to wake up to things, and
that's the problem.
And once you don't have the rule of law, then what happens? The first thing you see happen is no longer do people provide buy-in to the government. They no longer believe that they really have influence over their government. They know that self-governance no longer exists, and so they don't really buy in to help, to that community volunteer spirit that used to pervade back when we were kids. And I remember, my parents, if we'd be walking along the street and there'd be a piece of trash on the street, they'd stop and pick it up and throw it in the trash can. It was just that community spirit kind of thing that they had, that was buy-in to the community. And once you lose buy-in, then, the only thing that can happen is government has to replace it with programs. If people, that which people won't give voluntarily. And, then it's just like a big vicious cycle. And pretty soon the government itself becomes unsustainable. And that's what you see happening today.
There's no incentive for, you were describing before about, why should they, raise the taxes of the rich when the rich will just give them all kinds of loopholes and things, and why is that not a crime? Because the justice system is also getting paid off, I'm sure. And what the heck are we supposed to do when? That's what I mean. Money is basically just the opposite of what it's supposed to be, and it's being used to just create this complete breakdown and to be paying people off to create a completely criminal system.
Yeah, but let's not get too depressive about this whole thing. No matter how bad these problems are here in the United States, it's still the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry, as they say. We Americans have this innate expectation of freedom. We see how far we've gotten away from that just in one generation since we were kids, and we're offended by it. But other people, in other countries, they don't have this freedom tradition even to go by. I mean, they just believe, that, all oligarchs rule the world and that's the way it is. And it's only been with the advent of the internet where kids in other countries are now reacting, with us Americans who have this tradition of freedom. And this is, it's starting to spread now. And so, let's not be too depressed about our situation. And nobody's going to give us freedom. There is no simple fix. Right. You can't just and look what you're doing. Why are you doing this radio show? You're not doing it because you're making money. You're doing it because you're concerned about your nation and your situation. And that's the type of thing that makes America free. It's not difficult. You got to fight for it, and we've got to teach our kids that we've got to fight for it.
I'm so glad you said that. Oh my, like I am so glad you said that, because see, like, this is the problem. Too many people are convinced that money equals freedom, and I was just having a conversation with an aunt of mine just recently. About, like, she's, whatever, how old is she? 70, I think she just turned. And, she was talking about money and, and how having a lot of it would be so great and you'd have all this freedom. But like the point that I was trying to get across to her, but it's like, you don't have the money, and how do you get the money? So trying to get the money is not freedom. It's the opposite of freedom. And so how could money be equated with freedom if in order to get it, you and is rigged, so like it doesn't make any sense. And so what you just said about making an effort, so it's not the money that gives you the freedom, it's your sweat, and it's being educated, and it's doing okay. Like, believe you me, I am far from an expert on the monetary system, and I got to tell you, the way that I taught myself all about money and the way that money works in a real way was through health and fitness all my life, because that stuff is real, and the economy should be based on fitness and muscle building and fat burning. I mean, even what's his name? Robert Kiyosaki, the guy that wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I read that book a long time ago, said the same thing. It's like fitness. It's like building muscle and trimming the fat. That's the way the economy, should be run. But because who's controlling money and the way that it's being used and this complete breakdown. So that's what I'm saying. Like, you just said it. It's not money that is freedom. It's your sweat. It's making an effort. It's being informed. It's, besides having a radio show, being out and going to events and protesting, doing something. I mean, learning about things, somehow.
Well, what's important is not to get too negative about the situation. I mean, just because we can't fix this by sticking a key in the door, you don't want that anyway. You don't want that kind of solution. You want an organic solution that's difficult to get, and therefore difficult to lose.
Right.
And so right now we haven't paid much attention to maintaining it, and so the bad guys have taken it away. Exactly. And they're smart enough to know, just to keep doling out enough money to us so that we don't get too immediately upset and go and fix it. But everybody knows something's wrong, and we just have to keep working at it, and the truth will emerge. The truth absolutely will emerge.
It will definitely. I mean, of course it will. I mean, to me, everything comes down to like physics. I mean, right, sooner or later, like, just natural law is going to be quite clear. I mean, I think it's pretty clear already. I mean, I don't think it's that confusing. When we put things in simplistic ways, because of course the powers that be that don't want this to end want to keep people confused, and it's that act of being confused that we need to kind of see through that, because anybody that wants things to change and wants the people to benefit will make it simpler so that people can understand. So just the fact that people are confused, is something to kind of, heed, so that the people that are confusing you obviously are the ones that you have to watch out for and know that they don't want this to end.
Well, pretty easy. You gotta eliminate the ability of the federal government to borrow, and you've gotta eliminate anybody who says we're going to have tax reform and tax the rich and make it more fair and all that. And all that means is that it's going to be more complex, and the rich are really going to get off again. You've got to make a tax code that's just really simple. And even if that's like, okay, 15% sales tax with an exclusion on food and drugs, or, you know, whatever poor people need to be excluded from, but just really simple stuff. The more complicated it is, the more the bad guys are going to use it for their own purposes.
Exactly, because see, like, that's just it. I mean, simplifying it as basic and fundamental as we can make it, because that's exactly right. You know, they want to keep your head spinning, so that, I mean, you know, so if your head's spinning, then don't go in that direction. Like, then you know that person is the bad guy, if you know, and to not listen to them if you can't understand things.
Right. If you can't understand it, it's wrong.
Right.
Or at least the messenger's wrong.
And I mean, if somebody was really sincere and looking out for you, first of all, they would be taking the time to explain things. Like, that's why I kind of, you know, I can never understand, you know, like someone that might go to some stockbroker and say that they want to, you know, whatever, get rich or something. And the stockbroker, like, doesn't take the time to be explaining to that person, to the client, how things work, you know, and that's the sign right there. Like, this is why I am really glad that I, you know, studied real things like health, because, and, you know, and looking at things that are real, and relationships, because I knew from my, you know, psych majoring and reading every book about, you know, what healthy relationships are, that someone that doesn't slow down and want to explain things to you so that you understand it, whether it's a doctor explaining some kind of procedure or something that you need to go through with whatever medications or surgery or whatever the heck they want to do, you know, they should always be slowing down and taking the time to explain things to people. And anyone that doesn't do that, that wants to have this attitude that they're up here and you're down here and it's too complicated for them to explain it, or you're not going to understand it, you should be running for the hills from that person. You know, but again, like, nobody, you know, I mean, nobody taught me anything. I mean, I just read and get as much information about things as I can, because I knew, you know, you started before talking about, you know, this country having some kind of history of freedom, that, to be honest, I never experienced any history of freedom in this country, which is kind of like why I started to, I just pretty much knew debt. You know, as soon as I came into this world, all I really knew about was debt. So I never knew anything about freedom, which is what got me into learning things and reading and trying to teach myself things, you know, decades ago, at least 35 or so years ago.
Well, number one, you need to forbid national borrowing. Sovereign nations do not have to borrow. The borrower becomes the lender. Yeah. And in the case of nations, lenders are, in the majority, the biggest banks. And number two, all nations need to issue their own debt-free sovereign currency again, and put an end to consolidated currencies like the euro. And just in general, in just about everything in political life, you want to always go for deconsolidation of power, not consolidation of power. You'll never see people demonstrating in the streets, ever, 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 "Oh, we've got too much power, please take it away."
I mean, you know, and what gives people, I don't know, I have no idea what makes people think that the government, you know, cares about them and is even the least bit interested in their benefit at all.
Well, I wouldn't be that negative. I know a couple congressmen, and one in particular who's a real good guy, and I trust him implicitly. So you can't brand them all. And actually, we've got to cut back. We've got to return respect for self-governance, and because if we don't have self-governance, if we don't have the rule of law, then we can't have anything but the law of the jungle. And that's rapidly, you see that taking hold in cities like Chicago with the murder rate. It's nothing but the law of the jungle right now. People have no buy-in to their government. They don't feel they're in control of it. And so they're just running wild out there. But in any case, I mentioned the first two solutions: forbid national borrowing. All nations should issue their own money. And then the third one is to forbid fractional reserve lending and possibly all lending at interest. Now, we don't want to, I heard you mention at the first that we want to nationalize the Fed. No, you don't want to nationalize the Fed. We don't want one big national bank. Why? Because it violates the consolidation of power rule. You want to have the bank power, the banking power, spread out to the maximum extent. You want small local banks. You want to eliminate the ability of these giant bank combines to cause these huge regional bank monopolies. We need banks. They provide useful services and that people are willing to pay for. What we don't need to do is we do not need to nationalize banks. That's absolutely the wrong way to go. You want to do just the opposite. You want to deconsolidate the banking power to the greatest possible extent.
What would a national bank look like? I mean, would it look like a Walmart that's in like every town across the country?
Well, I guess. I mean, there are some in the monetary reform movement that want to see something like the Fed be the sole source of all lending. Can you imagine that? Somebody like you or me, if we're opposed to the political government in power at the time, and we want to go get a house mortgage or borrow money for a car or something like that, we go to the National Bank and they go, April Waters, enemy of the people. Nope, you ain't getting no loan. Go away. But in a deconsolidated banking structure, there'd be banks that would tend to agree with April Waters, banks that tend to agree politically with me, and it's okay to have like Democrat banks and libertarian banks and Republican banks and atheist banks and Christian banks, Muslim banks. It's okay. Let that happen. That's what you want. And then if you can't get satisfaction from one bank, you go across the street to the other one. They'll be happy to lend to you.
I mean, when I go to buy shampoo at the drugstore, sometimes I'm completely overwhelmed by the amount of choices that there are. So why can't we have more choices in banks? You
want more choices in everything, especially in stuff that involves political power.
And so what about, this lending with interest nonsense?
Well, that's kind of the leading edge of where I'm unsure what to tell people, because it seems difficult. I'm just convinced at this point that since the interest is not created and it tends to get bigger and bigger and bigger, that eventually the interest is going to eat up everything. Right. And so we've got to do something about that. We've got to move to an interest-free lending system, kind of like they do in Muslim banking, where it's not that you get money back for the risk that you take. There's a risk premium, but instead of having the interest compound over years, you pay all the interest up front when you take out the loan. So if you go and you want to borrow $100,000 to buy a house, let's say, then you don't go and get a $100,000 loan. You get a $110,000 loan, but you only get the proceeds of $100,000. The $10,000 goes to service the loan. It's a one-time fee, and there's no additional interest. That's the way it should be done. Yeah. That prevents the compounding interest problem.
Do you know about what's that place? It's called Guernsey.
Yeah, Guernsey is a place that decided to create their own money. It's in the Channel Islands. It's actually part of Great Britain, but it's closer to France. I've been there, and back 200 years ago, it was a pretty remote place, and all they had were cows. There were Guernsey cows, and then the neighbor island was called Jersey, Jersey cows. And so they basically, lived off of selling dairy products. But they had a very, like a prehistoric kind of port, and so ships from England couldn't come over and really buy their goods very efficiently. So they said, look, we need to fix our port and make a market, a nice fancy market, so people can come and we can sell our goods and get more, money coming in to the island. And so they agreed to just issue their own money. Instead of using just British pounds, they'd issue their own money called Guernsey pounds, and it would trade 1 for 1, even with the British pound. And they knew that what would happen with this would cause inflation on the island if they just started, making a bunch of extra money. They needed the extra money to pay, the workers on the island to do all these construction projects. But they said, that's okay. We'll all suffer the inflation equally. And in the end, we'll get something we want and we'll all benefit. And that's exactly what they did. It was just they decided to do it. And so they created their own money, printed up colorful paper notes and called them money, which is really all you need. That's perfectly fine. And they started, the government would spend this money out to the carpenters and the stonemasons and whatever was needed. And so they fixed their port facility. They fixed it all up, and they made this big stone market. And I've been in the stone market in Guernsey, and it worked out great. Then they started getting all this import money in, and the island started becoming very, very prosperous. And so, they've never suffered inflation. If you go on the Guernsey website, you'll see they're like inflation hawks. Their website is just filled and graphs, how much inflation, because they know that's the key to their success. And so now they're this big wealthy tax haven of Great Britain. They have, I think their top tax rate is 20% or something like that. And it's just pulled the island from prehistoric obscurity to this very bountiful place. And if you want to, for example, if you want to make a deposit and you don't live in Guernsey, the minimum, when I was there, and this is 17 years ago, was $250,000 you had to put in the bank. So
wow.
They're doing very well now. And, forget about what the gold bugs tell you, that no fiat currency has ever done anything but self-destruct. It's just not true. It's worked great in Guernsey.
And that's 200 years ago they did that?
Yeah, I think it was 1848 was when they did it.
And so, it sounded like you said something about, going through some kind of a struggle period. I just wanted to ask you, because I keep hearing, people talking about, they want to keep propping the system up rather than letting it crash. And wouldn't it be better to just kind of let it crash?
Yeah, it would be better than what's existing. But, the politicians know that if it's on their watch, then they're going to get the blame. And so that's why they'll do absolutely anything the bankers want to keep the bankers rolling out that debt money, and we'll let my successor worry about paying the interest on the national debt later on, and that's the way the system is. But we could do it differently. We could just say, look, this system isn't working, and it's quite easy to determine mathematically that it's going to explode at some point and destitute all of us. Exactly. So why don't we just agree to take these simple steps? We're just going to forbid borrowing, but we're going to do it gradually. And I learned this from the Israelis. This is the Israeli proposal to their Knesset. And right now, 95% of their money is created by banks as interest-bearing notes. Only 5% is created by the government, which are just the coins in your pocket. And so they just said, this is what we're going to do. The first year, we're going to make it so that 85% only of the money is created by banks, and we're going to increase the amount of state money, coin money or paper money issued by the state, to 15%. And then we're going to see how the economy does. We're going to look at the metrics. And if it looks good, then the next year we'll increase it. We'll make it 70% bank money and 30% state money, and eventually 50-50. And then eventually just phase out bank money altogether, make it all state money, and the economy will thrive. Nobody will suffer. It won't be a big, harsh change, and everything will be good.
Well, right. That's when you have to go through some kind of withdrawal. I mean, right, like quitting smoking, or giving people some kind of something that's going to wean them off of like a drug treatment. There's got to be something.
Yeah, people just have to understand that nations don't have to borrow their money to have money, and this is stupidity.
Right. And so who's behind it all? Who's behind it all?
The people that lend money, because that gives them control. It gives them absolutely control over the political process. And what that does is absolutely guarantee that their money monopoly, this rigged system, will never be fixed by Congress.
No, but who's doing the borrowing? Like who's... Right, like deciding...
Congress, because when Congress wants to spend more than they actually have in income, in revenue, then they borrow it. So, but they don't need to be in that paradigm. They just, you can't fix that paradigm. You just have to get out of it and say, no more borrowing at all.
Right.
Cold turkey. We're done.
Exactly. I mean, so what, I mean, we have like 5 minutes left. Like who do we take this proposal to? Like do we go to somebody with it and say, okay, I don't know, Dennis Kucinich, he's not in Congress anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, for example, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've done maybe going close to 3,000 interviews, and I've never been on a national TV show. Never, ever, ever. And I'm not saying anything radical, I'm just saying common sense stuff.
Right.
Well,
that's just it. People are like that's, the simplicity of it. It's like, I sometimes I really don't think people can comprehend simplicity. It's like, oh, it just can't be that simple.
Well, that's right. But
it is.
The doggone gold bugs are in there, just beating their drum that, we've got to have gold as a solution. Let me give you this final quote going out. This is a famous J.P. Morgan quote. As a man of sense, I am a gold bug and support a gold bug government and a gold bug society. As a man of the world, I like confusion, anarchy, and war. And that was an 1895 letter to his brother from page 348 of Morgan, American by Jane Strauss, published by HarperCollins in the year 2000. So this is not fancy. This is what these guys want. They want gold as money because gold's easy to control.
Yeah. So what are you working on now? Like what projects are you working on these days? Like what?
Well, I'm working on a cryptocurrency solution in the Caribbean to make it easy to buy Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies, to trade in and out of them without having to go through this rigmarole that you have to go through. And I have an agent that's interested in me writing a book on the Malaysian Flight 370 problem. I don't think it's down in the southern route at all. I think there's zero evidence for that. It's just a diversion for some reason. I don't know exactly what, but I think it went along the northern route. I think that's where all the evidence is. And so I'm working on that in my spare time besides doing my YouTubes, which I put up every day. I just put one up just before I went on the show on this TV show in Russia between where Snowden came on a talk show with Putin.
Right. Yes, I'm subscribed to your YouTube channel, so I get all of your new uploads, and I watch most of them. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to keep up.
It is hard to keep up, but I'm determined to try to put one up every day.
Good for you. That's something I think I should aspire to. I try to write my blog every day. Even that's difficult. Or do my yoga practice every day.
Well, it takes most of the day for me to do it because it's a video production, so it's hard. But anyway, the channel is Be Still and the number 3, and you all drop by.
Let me see. What else do I want? Oh, how did the Jekyll Island documentary work out? I mean, how is that going?
It's going fine. It's I don't own it, so Jekyll Island Productions in Burbank, California owns it, and they plan on sending me royalties once a year. So I don't watch the clock on that. I just keep doing what I'm doing.
And so, what about, was there a Hollywood movie possibly going to?
Yeah, we've got a nice script for a J.P. Morgan era feature-length film, and we have some interest in that. We need about between $2 and $3 million to produce that, and so that's kind of out of my typical league of fundraising. But I imagine at some point we'll get that and make it happen.
Okay, yeah, keep me up to date. I'd really like to know what's going on with that. Okay, Bill, thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Sure, anytime. Thanks.
Okay.